He ghosted my payment after 3 months of flawless work. So, I didn't just ask for my money. I rewrote his entire brand. The silence from his end was the loudest thing. This is the story of how I turned creative rage into cold, calculated vengeance. The silence from his end was the loudest thing. It wasn't a polite, professional silence, the kind that suggests a busy inbox or a mild scheduling conflict. This was a vacuum, a complete, digital vanishing act. I had sent the final invoice, the one that represented 3 months of late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and a desperate need to prove to myself, really, that I was worth the investment. It was a hefty sum, a proper chunk of change for the quality of the work, the sheer hours poured into polishing his sleek, utterly predictable, yet undeniably effective branding package. I'd attached the deliverables, the mock-ups, the usage rights agreement, and the final, crisp request for payment. 2 days passed. My first thought was, maybe he is traveling. Then, maybe he's buried under a mountain of client emails. Then, the knot in my stomach tightened, morphing into something sharper, something that felt like a tiny, insistent pebble digging into my ribs. 4 days. I sent a follow-up, a polite, breezy little email. Hi Mark, just circling back on the invoice for the brand refresh. Let me know if you need anything else from my side. Still nothing. Not even an automated bounce back, which would have been a small mercy. 7 days. The polite veneer began to crack. The initial professional courtesy frayed at the edges, revealing a vein of something hotter underneath. I started checking his social media profiles. He was active, very active, posting glossy photos of his new minimalist office space, talking about synergistic growth and unbridled creative momentum. He was celebrating his new branding, the very thing I had given him, as if it were a miracle bestowed from the heavens. It was infuriating. He was basking in my labor, soaking up the reflected glory, and treating my payment request like a minor inconvenience, like a spam filter notification. By the 10th day, the simmering resentment had boiled over into a steady, low-grade simmer of pure, unadulterated rage. I stopped using capital letters in my emails, but the subtext was screaming. My replies were clipped, overly formal, each punctuation mark feeling like a tiny, pointed jab. Per the attached agreement, payment is due within 14 days of invoice receipt. Awaiting remittance for Project Phoenix. Kindly confirm receipt and expected transfer date. He finally responded on the 11th day. It was terse. A single line, got it. We'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. What a wonderfully dismissive phrase. It implied competence, but it carried the distinct scent of procrastination. It was a corporate shrug. It meant it's on my to-do list, somewhere below the urgent Slack notification from Brenda. I waited. The next 3 days were agony. Each morning, when I opened my laptop, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to fire off a gentle nudge, a humorous gif, anything to break the tension. But I held back. I decided to let the silence do the heavy lifting. Let him feel the weight of his oversight. Let him feel the mild, constant anxiety that creeps in when you know you owe someone money, but the timeline is vague. And then, on the 14th day, the final deadline, nothing. Not a transfer notification, not a confirmation email, not even a passive-aggressive oops, got caught up in a meeting. Just the gaping maw of silence again. That was the tipping point. The gentle, reasonable, slightly weary professional who was used to being undervalued finally snapped. The quiet, meticulously organized freelance artist morphed into something coiled, sharp, and deeply aggrieved. I felt a sudden, crystalline clarity. This wasn't about the money anymore, though the money was significant. This was about respect. It was about ownership. Mark wasn't just delaying a payment. He was diminishing my contribution. He was treating my talent like a free public good, something he could sample, admire, and then forget about until the cash flow required it. I leaned back in my chair, the old, slightly squeaky ergonomic beast, and stared at the file folder labeled Mark Phoenix Rebrand. Inside, nestled among the mood boards and font pairings, was the final, glossy presentation deck, the one that showcased his new logo, a stylized, abstract hawk soaring over a simplified mountain range. It was magnificent. It was mine. My mind began to race, not with anger, but with strategic glee. Revenge, when executed properly, isn't loud. It's surgical. It's quiet, precise, and devastatingly effective. The contract stated clearly, client retains full usage rights to the final visual identity, provided all associated invoice payments are settled in full. The implied understanding, the unspoken law of the creative industry, was that a client was buying the right to use the thing, not just borrowing it for a while. I logged into the digital asset management system. I found the source files for the logo, not just the JPEG he was currently plastering on his website, but the master vector files, the original color palette codes, the specific kerning settings, the underlying geometric structure. He was using the hawk. He was using the mountain. He was using the clean, sharp, confident vibe of the hawk. I took a deep breath, the smell of old paper and strong coffee filling my lungs. This was going to sting. The execution was simple, yet it required absolute focus. I didn't just send a follow-up email demanding payment again. I prepared a comprehensive, beautifully formatted document. It wasn't an invoice request. It was a notification of rights enforcement. The subject line read, urgent, copyright claim, and pending license transfer project Phoenix. Inside, I laid out the facts. Invoice number 401, amount due $4,500, due date day 14. Then, I cited the relevant clause from our agreement. And then, the payload. I attached the master vector file of the hawk/mountain logo, but I didn't leave it pristine. I had already begun the subtle, beautiful act of sabotage. I opened the file in Illustrator. I didn't change the shape. That would be too obvious, too petty. Instead, I tweaked the geometry. I nudged the primary wing feather by a fraction of a millimeter. I altered the apex of the mountain peak by a hair's breadth. I changed the curve of the hawk's neck just enough that it looked slightly more aggressive, slightly more burdened. It was barely perceptible to the casual eye, the one scrolling through his Instagram feed while waiting for his coffee to brew. But to someone who had lived inside the logo for the last 3 months, who knew the exact intended balance, the perfect visual harmony of the design, the change was a dissonant chord. It was wrong. It felt off. And then, I went to the color palette. His primary brand color was a sophisticated, muted teal, Pantone 327C. I changed the teal by maybe 2 points, shifting it toward a slightly muddier, more industrial sea green. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't his perfect teal anymore. Finally, I went to the typography. He used a clean sans serif for his wordmark. I found the specific typeface file and applied a micro adjustment to the letter spacing, a reduction of 0.1 points across the entire wordmark. It was so subtle, it was almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I attached this altered master file, and in the body of the email, I wrote, please find attached the finalized master vector file for the Phoenix brand identity. Note the minor, necessary adjustments made to the primary glyphs to ensure perfect fidelity across all digital platforms. Per our agreement, these finalized assets are held under copyright until full remittance is received. I hit send. The immediate response was instantaneous. What did you do? It wasn't a polite, delayed we'll take care of it. This was a startled, slightly panicked inquiry. I waited exactly 10 minutes. Then, the second email arrived, more frantic. Look, I'm in a meeting, but can you send me a comparison shot? The color feels richer, and the hawk looks like it's straining a bit more. I smiled, a slow, internal flexing of muscles that felt incredibly satisfying. It is simply optimized for better digital contrast. Mark, I typed back. But you are correct. It does have a slightly more dynamic tension now. Then came the final devastating message, arriving just as I was pouring myself a glass of water, the ice clinking perfectly against the glass, mirroring my internal state. Can you just send me the original, unedited version? The one that was in the presentation deck? The one with the perfect teal? The perfect teal. The one that was supposed to be the bedrock of his entire visual identity. The one that defined his effortless, expensive-looking grace. I opened the original file. It was glorious. Then, I opened the modified file. It was perfectly flawed. And in that moment, I understood the true nature of my victory. It wasn't just the $4,500. It was the slow, creeping doubt I had managed to implant into his professional mind. It was the tiny, nagging voice that would whisper to him every time he looked at his logo, is it right? Or is it slightly, beautifully, expertly wrong? I typed my final response, and the rage, which had been a hot, consuming fire, settled into a cool, powerful, simmering satisfaction. Of course, Mark, but understand this. The original version is only available upon receipt of the full payment. The subtly enhanced, optimized, and now slightly more meaningful version is available immediately. Which version would you like to use while the wire transfers? The silence returned, but but this time, it wasn't a vacuum of neglect. It was a pregnant pause, a moment of reckoning. He had to choose. He had to acknowledge the subtle tyranny of metatistic touch. He didn't hesitate. The enhanced one, the one you tweaked. Please send the invoice link over immediately. The payment came 3 hours later. A confirmation email, devoid of fluff, just the necessary transactional confirmation. I watched the notification pop up, and instead of a triumphant shout, I just took a slow, deep breath. The injustice was righted, not with a shout, but with a perfectly adjusted kerning value. He paid because he couldn't tolerate the feeling of being slightly, aesthetically off. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the subtle, undeniable proof that a person who created the thing holds the ultimate authority over it. He was paying me to own his vision, and every time he used that slightly more dynamic, slightly muddier, perfectly tensioned hawk soaring over his mountain, he wasn't just seeing his brand. He was seeing my meticulous, justified, glorious revenge. He was seeing me.